The truth is never loud when it arrives. It slips into the room quietly, like a shadow, and waits for someone brave enough to look it in the eye. That's how it felt the night Jonathan Mercer first saw his ex-wife again. A moment so simple on the surface. Just a crowded gala. Just a glance across a glittering room. But beneath the surface, it was the tremor that would unearth everything they thought they had buried. If you've ever believed that secrets have a way of finding their way back no matter how carefully we try to hide them, then stay with me. And if that resonates with you, make sure you like and subscribe so we can keep uncovering stories cut from this same cloth of betrayal, mystery, and redemption. Now, let me take you into the world of Jonathan, a man who believed he had shed the skin of his past life only to discover that it was still clinging to him in the form of an infant he didn't even know existed. The night had begun with all the polish and performance that came with being one of the youngest CEOs in Boston's bustling tech industry. The ballroom smelled faintly of champagne and lilies, a calculated mix of elegance and expense, while light from the massive chandelier fractured into 100 scattered diamonds across the marble floor. Jonathan thrived in such spaces. Firm handshake, sharp tuxedo, an easy smile that hinted at warmth but never betrayed too much. He had trained himself to live behind that glass wall, untouchable, a figure admired, envied, sometimes resented, but always separate. Yet even the most carefully constructed walls develop cracks. His first glimpse of Rachel was not cinematic, not the slow-motion drama of a film. It was abrupt, like stepping into icy water without warning. She was near the far edge of the ballroom, her hair swept into a low knot, her dress a deep blue that clung to her form, simple but striking, the kind of elegance that drew attention by refusing to ask for it. And in her arms, a baby. His mind, usually sharp enough to analyze data trends in seconds, slowed into a strange haze. He noticed the way her hands cradled the infant instinctively, the way she shifted her weight so as not to wake him, the way her smile softened as someone peeked into the blanket to coo. Jonathan's breath caught. A child. A newborn, by the looks of it. He hadn't seen Rachel in over a year, not since the ink had dried on their divorce papers, not since they had gone their separate ways in anger and exhaustion, convinced there was nothing left between them worth salvaging. Yet here she was, and here was this baby, a baby who could not be more than a few months old. Time twisted in his chest as he tried to count backward, as he tried to place the impossible math. His drink felt suddenly heavy in his hand, so he set it down on the nearest table and began to move through the crowd, every step echoing in his ears louder than the music from the string quartet. He had no plan for what he would say, no script to lean on. He only knew that if he didn't get closer, if he didn't see the child more clearly, the questions clawing at him would tear him apart. The people he passed greeted him with nods. Some tried to catch his attention for conversation, but Jonathan barely registered them. The gala had become a blur of faces and glitter and hollow laughter, a stage on which only one person mattered. Rachel looked up as he approached, her eyes widening in the briefest flicker of recognition, then hardening with something else, wariness, perhaps, or defiance. It struck him with the force of memory. Those eyes had once softened at the sight of him, had once brimmed with trust, love, and belief in the future they could build together. Now they were steel. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was louder than the music, louder than the clinking glasses and murmured conversations around them. He glanced at the infant then, wrapped in a pale blanket, a tuft of dark hair visible against the fabric, lips parted in the restless half-sleep of newborns. His chest constricted. His thoughts tangled into one brutal question. Could he be mine? Rachel's voice broke the silence, low but sharp enough to slice through the air. Jonathan. Just his name, no warmth, no invitation. He heard in it the wall she had built since leaving, the one he hadn't dared to climb until now. Rachel. He managed, though his throat felt dry. That's your baby. She did not flinch, did not look away, only shifted her arms slightly to adjust the infant, as though he were nothing more than a weight that needed balancing. Yes. The simplicity of her answer was maddening, a locked door without a key. He wanted to demand more, to shake the truth out of her, but the presence of the baby tempered him, forced him into restraint he rarely practiced. Whose child is he? He asked finally, the words heavier than he intended, and perhaps too blunt, but subtlety had abandoned him. For the first time, Rachel's gaze faltered. Not long, only a heartbeat, but long enough to confirm what his gut had already begun to scream. She did not need to answer. Her silence answered for her. The baby shifted then, letting out a small sound, a sigh or a whimper, and Jonathan felt a pang deep in his chest that he could neither explain nor contain. He had spent the last year building his empire higher, winning contracts, dazzling investors, convincing himself that he had chosen freedom over domestic entanglements. But now freedom tasted like ashes in his mouth. He was staring at what could very well be his son, a year stolen from him by choices he hadn't even known he was making. And as Rachel turned slightly, as if to shield the baby from him, 1,000 unspoken accusations burned between them. Jonathan leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper, but laced with all the fury, betrayal, and aching confusion boiling within him. How could you keep this secret? The cafe smelled faintly of roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement, the kind of scent that seeps into your clothes and lingers long after you've left, and Jonathan found himself clinging to it as though it could anchor him to something solid, something that wasn't unraveling beneath his feet. Across the small round table, Rachel sat with her coffee cooling untouched, the baby asleep in his stroller beside her, his tiny fists curled tight, as though he too already knew the world was something you had to brace yourself against, and the silence between them stretched so taut it felt like it might snap at any moment. Jonathan hadn't slept since the gala, his mind replaying the image of the infant over and over, the rise and fall of that small chest, the impossible timeline that aligned too perfectly with the final months of their marriage. And now that he was here, he found himself teetering between fury and desperation, unsure which would spill out first. "You owe me the truth," he said. Finally, his voice low but threaded with an urgency that betrayed just how much he had lost control. "Is he mine?" And for a long moment Rachel didn't answer, only traced the rim of her coffee cup with her fingertip as though the question itself was too sharp to touch directly. Then she exhaled slowly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of exhaustion and steel. "Yes, Jonathan, he's yours." And the words landed with the weight of both revelation and confirmation, a truth that his gut had already known but his heart had been too afraid to claim. He leaned back in his chair, his pulse hammering, the world tilting slightly as if the ground beneath him had shifted. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, each word edged with incredulity, with the ache of months lost, and she shook her head, a bitter laugh slipping past her lips. "Because you wouldn't have heard me then. Not over the noise of your boardrooms and your shareholders and your late-night meetings with people whose names I never even knew. Jonathan, you were already gone long before the papers were signed. You chose your empire over us, and I chose to protect my son from being an afterthought in your world." Her words stung with precision, as if each one had been sharpened on the whetstone of sleepless nights and silent sacrifices. And he wanted to argue, wanted to protest that she was wrong, that he would have been there, but the memories betrayed him. The missed dinners, the unanswered calls, the way her voice had trembled when she told him she felt invisible in his shadow. Still, the thought of all he had missed, the first cry, the first sleepless nights, the first fragile smiles, tore through him. A grief so raw it nearly buckled him in his seat. "You had no right," he said hoarsely, though even as he spoke he knew it was a weak defense. "No right to decide for both of us." But Rachel's eyes flared with the fire of someone who had walked through storms alone and survived. "No right? Jonathan, I had no choice. I was 7 months pregnant, abandoned in more ways than one. And you think I was going to beg you to care when you barely noticed I was there? Do you even remember the night I told you I was scared about the birth, how you promised you'd make time, only to fly out the next morning for a deal in San Francisco? That was the night I stopped waiting for you." Her words carved through him, each memory resurfacing like shards of glass from a tide he thought he had buried. And for the first time in years Jonathan found himself speechless, his usual arsenal of polished arguments useless against the raw truth of her lived pain. The baby stirred then, a small cry muffled by the blanket, and Rachel's hands moved instinctively, soothing him with the practiced grace of someone who had done this countless times alone. Jonathan watched, transfixed, something inside him cracking open at the sight, because that was his son, his blood, His legacy not written in contracts or stock auctions, but in the curl of a fist, the quiver of a lip, the fragile innocence of a life he hadn't been given the chance to know. "What's his name?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it, his voice softer now, stripped of its armor, and Rachel hesitated only a moment before answering. "Lucas." The name seemed to bloom in the air between them, fragile and powerful all at once, and Jonathan whispered it under his breath as though tasting it, as though trying to anchor himself to the syllables of a life he had missed. "Lucas," he repeated, his chest tightening. "My son." And Rachel's eyes softened just for a moment, the steel giving way to something weary but tender. "Yes, your son, though you'll have to earn the right to call him that, Jonathan, because being a father isn't about a name or a claim, it's about showing up, and so far, you haven't." The sting of her truth settled into him like a brand, and he realized that this wasn't a negotiation, not a merger he could muscle his way into, but a battle for trust, for redemption, for the chance to prove he was more than the man who had walked away without realizing what he was leaving behind. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers, the noise of the cafe fading until it was just the three of them in that fragile bubble of truth. "Then give me the chance," he said quietly, the plea unvarnished and uncalculated. "Give me the chance to show him, to show you, that I can be the man I should have been." And for the first time since the gala, Rachel's gaze wavered, not in weakness but in the hint of possibility, a flicker of something that might one day grow into forgiveness, but only if he proved worthy of it. The weeks that followed unfolded like cautious steps across thin ice, each one threatening to crack under the weight of unspoken history. But neither Jonathan nor Rachel turned back. He began showing up, not with grand gestures or sweeping promises, but with quiet consistency. A stroller pushed through the park on a Sunday morning. A bottle warmed at midnight when exhaustion blurred Rachel's eyes. An investor call silenced mid-sentence, so he could answer a cry from Lucas's crib. The transformation was not sudden, nor was it easy. Rachel watched with guarded eyes, waiting for the inevitable slip, the moment when ambition would once again consume him. But instead she found herself witnessing something else. Jonathan learning to bend, to slow, to listen. One evening, as autumn settled over the city, she found him on her doorstep, Lucas asleep against his chest, tiny fingers gripping his father's shirt as if unwilling to let go. Jonathan looked up, weary but resolute, and whispered, "I missed his first year. I won't miss another." Something in his voice, raw, unpolished, stripped of pride, pierced the last of her defenses. She nodded, not in forgiveness yet, but in recognition of change, a recognition that perhaps the man before her was not the same one who had walked away. And so the story did not end with a sweeping reunion or a perfect resolution, but with the quiet promise of a second chance, fragile, uncertain, but real. Because some secrets, once revealed, do not destroy. They illuminate the path forward, reminding us that even in the wreckage of broken vows, love can return in a new form, not as possession, not as perfection, but as the shared devotion to a child who binds two lives together long after they thought they had severed the thread.